Chapter 1. The Body in the Rain. The night Arthur Doyle died, the rain came in sideways off the Mersey, needled by a wind that smelled of coal smoke, salt, and something sour that clung to the river at low tide. Constable Peter Rigby pulled his collar up and trod carefully along the slick cobbles between the warehouses, his torch beam skittering over puddles iridescent with oil. Somewhere further along the lane, someone was shouting his name. "Rigby!" "Over here." The voice belonged to Sergeant Mills, breath misting in the cold air. He stood in the mouth of a narrow service alley between two brick sheds, one hand raised as if to hold something invisible at bay. Rigby stepped closer, the wind trying to shove him back. The alley was a black gash, the walls close and high, the smell of fish and rot heavy enough to taste. The torch in his hand felt suddenly too small. He raised the beam. For a moment, all he saw were broken crates. A rusted hand truck, a coil of rope swollen with damp. Then the light caught on something pale against the cobbles. A hand. Fingers spread, palm up, as if reaching for rain. "Jesus," Rigby whispered. Arthur Doyle lay on his back, half in shadow, half in the weak cone of the torch. His coat was dark and heavy with water, but even so, Rigby could see the darker blooms spreading across his chest, radiating from 3 small, neat holes. His shirt was torn where someone had pulled it open, as if to search for a wallet or a pulse. On the lapel of the coat, someone had painted a crude symbol in thick, dripping red. The paint shone wetly in the light, too bright to be blood. It looked like a cross hacked through a circle, the kind of mark you would find scrawled on walls during a childish quarrel, except that this was on a dead man's chest. "Found him like this?" Rigby asked, his voice sounding flat in his own ears. "Dock watchman raised the alarm," Mills said. "Thought he heard a scuffle when he was doing his round. By the time he got here, whoever did it was long gone." Rigby knelt, feeling water soak through the knee of his trousers. Up close, Arthur's face looked oddly younger, the tension lines smoothed away, gray eyes half open to the rain. A lock of dark hair lay across his forehead, stuck there by water and whatever warmth remained. Rigby had seen him before, though never this close. On platforms in front of roaring crowds of dockers, on street corners, arguing with managers. In the newspapers, his name tied to words like agitation and trouble and unofficial strike. "Doyle," Rigby said quietly, as if saying the name might wake him. Mills grunted. "Union man, organizer, the big voice down here these last months." Rigby's gaze drifted back to the painted mark. "What do you make of that?" he asked. Mills spat rain from his lip. "Looks like someone wanted to make a bloody point. Either that or some half-wit with a paint pot trying to look clever." Rigby shivered, and it was not just the cold. Behind them, footsteps approached. The sound echoed oddly in the alley, amplifying each tread. Rigby stood, flicking rain from his torch. A figure in a dark overcoat appeared at the mouth of the lane, hat pulled low, a cigarette ember glowing briefly as he drew on it. Even before he saw the face, Rigby straightened a little. Detective Inspector James Calder had the kind of presence that filled a space without raising his voice. Tall, shoulders stooped slightly from years of leaning over desks and bodies, he carried himself like a man dragged reluctantly into every room by duty rather than curiosity. He took in the scene with a quick sweep of his eyes, the way some men scanned a betting slip. "Sergeant," he said. "Constable." "Sir," Mills replied. "Body was reported 20 minutes ago. No one's touched him." "Good," Calder said. "Let us keep it that way." He stepped into the alley, rain beating on the shoulders of his coat. Rigby caught the faint smell of tobacco and wet wool. Calder crouched by the body, his face unreadable. Arthur's eyes stared past him to a slice of night sky between the leaning brick walls. Calder studied the bullet wounds for a few seconds, then looked at the painted symbol. His jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Tell me that wasn't here when you arrived," he said. "It was, sir," Mills replied. "Fresh, still tacky." "Someone took their time," Calder muttered. "Shooting a man is one thing. Stopping for artwork is another." He stood and turned to the sergeant. "Get the photographer down here," he said. "And the doctor. I want him pronounced and out before the dockers come off shift and start milling about." "Last thing we need is a crowd around a dead Union leader when the city's already a tinderbox." "Yes, sir." Calder shifted his gaze to Rigby. "What do you know about him?" he asked. "Doyle, sir." Rigby swallowed. "Union organizer. Speaks at the gates near the south sheds. Been in the papers. Calling for the men to stay out until the owners back down. That sort of thing." "That sort of thing," Calder repeated dryly. "We live in an age where everything is that sort of thing. Strikes." Speeches, petitions. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, then looked back down at the body. "Someone just turned that sort of thing into a murder," he said. "And I have a feeling half the city will be queuing up to use it for their own ends by morning." A gust of wind drove a sheet of rain deeper into the alley, dousing the torch beam in flickers. Far out on the river, a foghorn bellowed, low and mournful. For a brief moment, it sounded, to Rigby's frayed nerves. Like a warning. Chapter 2. The Docks in Daylight. By the time the gray light of morning seeped over Liverpool, the news had already begun to spread in the way all bad news did. Unevenly, messily, along paths of rumor and half-truth. At the gate of the South Docks, where the cobbled street narrowed between high brick walls and the smell of diesel and tar thickened, knots of men stood beneath dripping caps, their breath steaming in the cold. "Them bastards finally did it," one said. voice hoarse with sleep and indignation. "I told you, didn't I? First they bring in the thugs, then they start picking us off." "You do not know it was them," another replied. "Could have been them communists. Doyle had enemies all over, always stirring." A third man, older, with a face lined like a dried riverbed, spat into the gutter. "Whoever it was," he said, "it were no docker. We may fight with fists, but we do not use guns in alleys." Near the gate, a small wooden platform had been set up over the past months as an unofficial speaking spot. Arthur Doyle had stood there many times, his voice booming across the yard, calling on the men to hold the line, to refuse blackleg wages and company intimidation. Now the platform stood empty, rainwater pooling on the rough boards. Under a corrugated awning, Frank Mallory hunched his shoulders against the damp and lit a cigarette with cupped hands. The match flared. Briefly illuminating his thin, sharp face and the faint scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, a souvenir from a flying crate years earlier. He had come to the docks as a boy, following his father's boots through the maze of cranes and sheds, watching men haul and stack and swear. The river had soaked into his bones. He could not imagine working anywhere else, even if the work sometimes felt like a slow, grinding war. Arthur Doyle had been the first man to make him believe that war might be winnable. "Oi, Frank," a voice behind him. He turned to see Billy Hart, a broad-shouldered docker with a nose flattened by too many pub fights, striding over. "You heard?" Billy asked, though the question was redundant. "Everyone's heard," Frank said. Billy jerked his head towards the sheds. "They say he were shot 3 times, he said. "Left him like a dog down by number 4. Paint on him and all." Like some bleeding message. Frank exhaled smoke slowly. "Who's they?" he asked. Billy shrugged. "Watchmen, coppers, blokes who know blokes. Does it matter? He is dead, innit?" The words landed like a physical blow. Frank had not seen the body. He was not sure he wanted to. The picture in his head was bad enough. Arthur lying in the filth, coat open, the fire gone from his eyes. "It matters who did it," Frank said. "And why?" Billy snorted. "Why? 'Cause he were making trouble." That's why. For someone. Might be the owners with their hired fists. Might be them red boys he flirted with. He stood in the middle of a lot of people what do not like each other. Eventually, someone was bound to shove. Frank's jaw tightened. "He did not flirt with anyone," he said. "He fought for us. You, me, everyone who lifts a crate in this place." "Maybe," Billy allowed, "but look where it got him." He glanced towards the gate, where 2 policemen now stood. Stiff and awkward in their uniforms as dockers streamed past, some heading into work, some turning away to join the strike lines. High above, a gull wheeled and screamed, its cry carried thinly on the wind. "Mallory," a new voice called. Frank turned to see Thomas Brennan pushing through the crowd, Brennan was older than most of the men, his sandy hair gone to gray at the temples, his glasses fogged by the drizzle. He wore a heavy overcoat and carried a battered leather satchel under one arm. Once, Brennan had been a docker himself. Then a fall from a ladder and a shattered hip had taken him out of the holds and into union offices. Some of the men called him the clerk behind his back. Arthur had called him the memory. "You need to come to the hall," Brennan said without preamble. "Margaret's there. She wants to speak to you." Frank flicked ash into a puddle. "How is she?" he asked. Brennan's expression tightened. "As you would expect, after a night like that," he said. "Come on." Frank stubbed out his cigarette and followed, heart thudding. The idea of facing Margaret Doyle filled him with a kind of dread that had nothing to do with fear. She had always seemed to him sterner than Arthur, less given to speeches, more to long, measured looks that made a man feel as if she could see every compromise he'd ever made. He wondered what she would see now, in him. In the crowd, in the city that had taken her husband and kept its mouth shut about it. Chapter 3. Margaret. The Union Hall on Paradise Street had once been a church, before the war and the bombs had carved gaps into Liverpool's stone skin. The stained glass was gone, replaced with plain panes that rattled in the wind, but the high ceilings and wooden beams still lent a faint echo to every voice raised within. Margaret Doyle sat at a long table near the front. Hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. A few hours earlier, those same hands had carried Arthur's blood on them, smeared when she'd pushed past a constable in the hospital corridor and grabbed his coat before they took him away. The doctor had been kind, in the blunt way of men who saw too much death. "3 shots, Mrs. Doyle," he'd said softly. "Chest. Close range. I am sorry. There was nothing anyone could have done." She had stared at his lips moving, and felt as if she... were watching someone speak behind a sheet of glass. The words registered like shapes pressed into wax. Now, in the hall, the glass was thicker. Around her, Union committee members shuffled papers, whispered, paced. A big clock on the back wall ticked loudly, each second dragging. The door opened, and Brennan ushered Frank inside. He took off his cap awkwardly, hair damp and flattened. "Margaret," Brennan said gently. "Frank's here." She looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Frank saw the changes the night had made in her. The hollowness under her eyes. The way her mouth pressed thin against whatever wanted to escape. "Mrs. Doyle," he said at last. "Frank," she replied. Her voice was steady, but it carried a new weight. Brennan withdrew a little, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Margaret gestured to a chair. "Sit," she said. Frank obeyed, hands resting on his knees. You were at the sheds last night? She asked. Until late, he said. Then a few of us went for a drink, the Black Swan. Arthur came by for a while. Her fingers tightened. He did not come home, she said. I waited, but he did not. I told myself he'd fallen asleep in some corner, that he'd come stumbling in at dawn with a sorry look and a speech about solidarity. Then the police knocked. Frank swallowed. He left the pub around 11, he said. Said he was meeting someone near the North Yard. Did not say who. You did not ask? There was no accusation in her tone yet, only a searching. I did, Frank said. He said, business, and smiled that half smile, like he always does when he thinks he knows better. Did you see if anyone followed? She asked. Frank closed his eyes briefly, replaying the night. The smoky light of the pub, the clink of glasses, Arthur pulling on his coat, the chill leaking in as he opened the door. There were a couple of lads by the bar watching him, Frank said slowly. Strangers, not dockers, I know. Big shoulders, city suits that did not belong in that place. One of them had hands like shovels, the kind of hands you do not get from paperwork. Did you tell anyone this? Brennan asked quietly. Frank shook his head, shame prickling. By the time the word came that he'd been found, he began, then trailed off. Margaret's gaze was sharp now, cutting. By the time the word came, everyone was running, she said. Running to see, running to tell, running to hide. Her eyes flicked to the far end of the hall, where a framed photograph of Arthur at a rally hung slightly crooked. He was mid-speech in the image, mouth open, fist raised, a sea of faces behind him. He knew this might happen, she said softly. Not like this, perhaps. He expected batons, cells, maybe a broken bone, not paint on his chest in some alley like a dog. Frank shifted in his chair. I want to help, he said. Whatever you need. You say the word. She studied him for a long moment. You can start, she said, by not letting them turn this into something it is not. What do you mean? He asked. She glanced at Brennan, then back to Frank. Already they are saying it was dock violence, she said, that he was killed by his own, by radicals, by foreigners, by whichever group suits the headline. They will use his death like a football. Kicking it back and forth in Parliament and in boardrooms, I will not have Arthur reduced to a slogan for men who never lifted a crate in their lives. Frank felt heat rise in his chest. Then we tell the truth, he said. About the suits in the pub, about the men hanging round the gates at night, about the threats. Margaret's mouth tilted in something that was almost a smile, but not quite. Do you really think they will listen? She asked. The police? The papers? The ministers? They will hear what is convenient. They always do. Not all of them, Brennan said quietly. Inspector Calder, for one, is not a fool. Margaret turned her gaze on him. Is he not? she asked. He came to my door with the news and would not meet my eyes. He spoke of incidents and ongoing investigations, as if Arthur were a file to be put in a cabinet. Grief makes all voices sound wrong, Brennan said, not unkindly. She exhaled, some of the tightness leaving her shoulders. I know, she said. But I also know this. If we do nothing, if we trust that the truth will rise like cream, we will be waiting until we are buried beside him. She looked back at Frank. You have a mouth men listen to, she said. Arthur thought highly of you, even if he shook his head at some of your ideas. Use that. Keep the men together. Do not let them be turned against each other. Frank nodded. I will. And watch yourself, she added. If they came for him, they might come for anyone who bears his mark. She glanced down at the red symbol painted on the lapel of Arthur's coat, which lay folded on the table, still damp. Someone had brought it from the hospital. The paint glistened, obscene. Frank felt a chill run through him. What does it even mean? He asked. Margaret looked at it for a long moment. I think, she said slowly, it means they want us to be afraid. Chapter 4. The Meeting. In a paneled room 3 floors up in an office building overlooking the river, the rain was just a pattern on the window, an abstract thing. Edward Hargreaves stood with his hands behind his back, watching a ship ease away from the dockside. The vessel's hull was a hulking shadow in the weak light, its cargo hold stacked with crates that had been loaded by men who had chosen, for now, to cross their own picket lines. Beautiful sight, is it not? A voice behind him drawled. Hargreaves did not turn immediately. It is a relief, he said. Every day those ships sit idle costs money. We cannot bleed forever because a handful of agitators want to play politics. The speaker, Charles Winfield, chairman of the Dock and Shipping Consortium, made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Agitators, he repeated. You make them sound like schoolboys. Hargreaves finally turned. Winfield was older, his hair thin and white, his suit immaculate. He held a glass of something amber that caught the light. Schoolboys with matches can burn down buildings, Hargreaves said, and certain elements in the unions these days are only too happy to strike one. Winfield waved a hand. This will pass, he said. The government cannot allow the docks to seize up indefinitely. Food, coal, imports, everything comes through here. They will do what is necessary. They always do. Eventually. Hargreaves thought of the telegrams and letters he had sent in the past months, carefully worded requests for assistance, couched in the language of national interest. He thought of the meetings with ministry men who had frowned and spoken of difficult optics, and labor's relationship with the unions. Eventually may not be soon enough, Hargreaves said. In the meantime, we have taken certain steps of our own. Winfield raised an eyebrow. Your security contractors? He asked. Yes, I have heard the whispers. Volunteers, private forces, whatever one calls them these days. They are effective, Hargreaves replied. Their presence alone has encouraged some of the more wavering men to return to work. A man thinks twice about standing on a picket when he sees someone across the road who looks like he stepped out of a regiment rather than a counting house. Winfield sipped his drink, eyes hooded. And last night? He asked. Was that the work of your volunteers? Hargreaves' jaw tightened. We do not have confirmation, he said, but I have been made aware that Arthur Doyle is dead. Shot. In a dock alley. Winfield's brows rose. Dear me, he said lightly. How clumsy. Hargreaves felt heat rise under his collar. With respect, sir, he said, a man like Doyle was not going to fade away quietly. He was organizing, radicalizing, calling for wider action. He had contacts with some very unsavory types. The longer he was left to shout, the louder he would become. And now? Winfield asked. Now his voice is gone, Hargreaves said. But his death will echo. There will be accusations, martyrs, songs. We must be ready to shape the story, or others will. Winfield regarded him for a long moment. You have always had a talent for euphemism, Edward, he said. Shaping stories, security contractors. Steps of our own. He turned to look out of the window himself. Do not mistake me, he continued. I have little love for men who can halt a nation's trade with a few whistles. I remember the strikes before the war, the way they talked of solidarity while perishable cargo rotted on the docks. But there is a line. We tread closer to it every time we let such robust measures bleed into the open. The open? Hargreaves said. It was a dark alley in the rain. Nothing stays in the dark forever, Winfield replied, particularly not in a city like this, where every porter and landlord's wife has a cousin in a union. He finished his drink, set the glass down with care. See to it, he said, that this is framed correctly. I do not want our names even whispered near it. Let the paper say he was killed by communists, by rival factions, by foreign dockers. Let the government use it to wag a finger at extremism on both sides. But we are not involved. Do you understand me, Edward? Hargreaves inclined his head. Of course, he said quietly. We are respectable businessmen. We merely wish to move goods. Precisely, Winfield said, and goods do not move well when soaked in blood. Outside, the ship's horn sounded, long and low, as it pushed into the gray morning. It sounded, to Hargreaves, less like a warning than a judgment. Chapter 5. The Inspector. Detective Inspector James Calder sat at his desk, the file on Arthur Doyle open before him. Outside his window, the city's sounds seeped through thin glass, the distant rumble of trams, the occasional shout, the constant susurrus of rain on stone. The file was thin, too thin for a case that would, he suspected, grow fat with interference before it was done. On the inside cover, in his own blunt hand, he had written, Arthur Doyle, age 38. Dock worker, union organizer, shot, 3 rounds, in alley between warehouses, 4 and 5, South Docks, time est, between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. No witnesses, as yet willing to speak. Calder stared at the last line. The watchman who had raised the alarm had been a wiry man with a face like dried leather and eyes that flicked constantly toward shadows. "Heard a noise, did I?" he'd said. "Like a bin going over. Then something like a car door slamming. When I got there..." He were already down. I did not see no one else. Just him. And that mark. When Calder had pressed him on whether he'd seen anyone lurking earlier in the evening, the man's gaze had slid away. "Lot of folk about these days," he'd muttered. "You know how it is?" Calder did know. He knew that fear could make liars of honest men faster than any bribe. He flipped the file closed as a knock sounded at his door. "Come," he said. Constable Rigby entered, cap in hand. "Sir," he said. "Mrs. Doyle is here. She asked to speak with you." Calder hesitated a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Send her in," he said. "And bring us some tea, will you?" Rigby disappeared, then returned holding the door for Margaret Doyle. She looked smaller in the stark light of the police station than she had in his memory of the doorway from the previous night, when grief had made her seem to fill the frame. Her hair was pulled back under a plain scarf, her coat buttoned to the throat. Her eyes, however, were sharper than any he had seen that morning. "Mrs. Doyle," Calder said, standing. "Please, sit." She did, back straight, hands folding in her lap. "You came quickly," he said. "You should be resting." "I have done enough lying down," she replied. "I would rather sit up and look a man in the eye when I ask him questions." There was no venom in her tone, just a blunt clarity. Calder sat as well. "Very well," he said. "Ask." "Will you find who did this?" she asked. It was the simplest question in the world, and the hardest. "I will do everything within my power," he said. It was as close to the truth as he could manage without stepping into false comfort. "But I must be honest with you. There will be obstacles." "Obstacles," she repeated. "Is that what you call men in suits who do not want you poking in their affairs?" He allowed himself a faint, humorless smile. "Among other things," he said. She leaned forward slightly. "My husband was not perfect," she said. "He could be arrogant, stubborn. He thought he knew better than most, but he was not a criminal. He did not deserve to die in a filthy alley with paint on his chest like some animal. If this is allowed to stand, what message does that send to every man who ever raised his voice at those above him?" Calder looked at her over steepled fingers. "You have a keen sense of the political," he said. "How can one not?" she replied. "In this city, Politics decides whether you eat, whether you freeze, whether you live in rubble or under a roof that does not leak. Rigby entered with 2 chipped mugs of tea and set them down, withdrawing quietly. Calder wrapped his hands around his, letting the heat seep into his fingers. "Tell me everything you know of last night," he said, "from the moment you last saw him." She recounted the evening. Arthur leaving the house with his scarf and his pamphlets. Promising to be back before the children wake, her own restless waiting, the knock at the door, the news. "I have spoken to Mr. Mallory," Calder said. "He said Arthur left the pub to meet someone near the North Yard. Did he mention any name to you?" "No," she said, "but he had been more guarded lately, more careful. He knew there were people watching him who did not wear union caps." "Such as?" Calder asked. She considered. "He said some of the men on the gates did not smell of the river," she said finally, "that they had clean hands and soldiers' eyes. He said he had seen them speaking with managers, with that one. Hargreaves." "Edward Hargreaves," Calder said. He knew the name. Everyone in his line of work did. "Head of operations for the consortium." "Yes," she said. "Arthur called him the man who counts profits in other men's bones." Calder's mouth twitched. It was a bitter line. But not inaccurate. "Did Arthur receive any threats?" he asked. "Letters, phone calls, men at the door." "A few anonymous notes," she said. "Things scrawled on scrap. Keep quiet or else. That sort of cowardice. He laughed at them. I did not." "Do you still have them?" Calder asked. "I burnt them," she said. "After the second one. I did not want the children to see, or for him to be arrested for some law against incitement if the words were twisted." Calder nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But in future I would ask you to keep such things. They are sometimes thread ends we can pull." "In future," she said quietly, "there will be no more notes. The worst thing they promised has already happened." He could not argue. "I will speak to Mr. Hargreaves," he said, "and to the men your husband mentioned. I will also need to ask others in the union about rivalries, disagreements." "You think one of his own did this?" she asked. A flash of anger flaring. "I think," Calder said carefully, "that in times like these, lines blur. Men who were friends yesterday can be enemies today, and there are those who would dearly like it to look as though this was union business, whatever the truth." She held his gaze. For a heartbeat, he wondered if she would stand and leave, branding him another arm of the same machine that had crushed her life. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "Do what you must," she said. "But remember." "My husband's blood is on more than one pair of hands. Do not let them wash it off with a headline." Calder nodded once. "I will try," he said. When she had gone, he sat for a long time, the taste of tea gone sour in his mouth. He thought of the painted symbol on Arthur's chest, bright against the wet fabric. It had not felt like something born of dockside grudges. It had felt staged, performed, a message, to whom and from whom remained to be seen. Chapter 6. Rumours on the Wind. By the second day, the story of Arthur Doyle's murder no longer belonged to the people who had known him. It belonged to the city. Newspapers hit doorsteps with headlines that grew bolder as the editions rolled. Union leader slain, dock feud. Suspected red agitator gunned down in Port Alley. Dock murder, police probe, rival faction, clash in pubs and tramcars, on factory floors and in queues outside grocers. People filled in the gaps with whatever fears or prejudices they already carried. "Bound to be them communists, ain't it?" a tram conductor said loudly to no one in particular. "Them lot have been at each other's throats for years. All that Moscow talk. Sooner or later someone reaches for a gun." "Rubbish," an older woman snapped back. "You think dockers need Moscow to tell them when they are hungry?" At the docks, rumors blew through the yards, like scraps of newspaper on the wind. Some said Arthur had been killed by a jealous husband, that he'd been seen speaking too kindly to a foreman's wife. Others swore he'd been got at by Irish Republicans, or by fascist hangovers from before the war, or by gangsters from the black market annoyed by his calls for honesty in the tally rooms. Among the men who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him on the picket lines, another story grew, quieter but more poisonous. "They used professionals," one whispered. The same types they brought in to rough up the lads in London back in '45. Hired hands. Their faces do not go in the papers. Only ours do. If anyone asked who they were, shoulders lifted in helpless shrugs. The owners, the government, the them that lived in warm rooms with clean curtains far from the stink of the river. In a narrow back street not far from Paradise Street, a smaller, darker rumor took shape in the cramped kitchen of a boarding house. "I heard," said Elsie. Who scrubbed floors at the Union Hall part-time. That one of the committee told him where he'd be. "Told who?" asked her sister, drying pots. "Them suits," Elsie said, eyes wide. "Over at the consortium. Someone's been talking in there for months. How else do you explain how they always seem to know when we're planning a march or a stoppage?" Her sister sucked her teeth. "Careful," she said. "Those walls have ears." Elsie glanced nervously at the thin plaster separating their kitchen from the next room. She lowered her voice. "Margaret will find out," she said. "You watch. She's not the sort to sit quiet with her hands folded." Chapter 7. Corporate Men. 2 days after the murder, Hargreaves kept his appointment with the police. He arrived at the station precisely on time, umbrella folded neatly, coat brushed, hat in hand. His shoes were polished enough to show a faint reflection of the ceiling lamps in the worn corridor tiles. Constable Rigby led him to Calder's office. "Mr. Edward Hargreaves," he announced. Calder looked up from the file. For a moment, he simply observed the man in the doorway. Mid-40s, spare, with a narrow, controlled face that spoke of years spent saying more with a raised eyebrow than some men did with an entire speech. "Mr. Hargreaves," Calder said, standing. "Thank you for coming." "Inspector?" Hargreaves replied, offering a curt nod. "I always do my best to cooperate with the authorities." He sat without being asked. Calder closed the file and folded his hands on the desk. "You are aware, I take it, of Arthur Doyle's death," he said. "One could hardly miss it," Hargreaves said. "The papers seem intent on turning him into some sort of martyr." "He was an employee of the docks," Calder said. "Technically, that now makes him an ex-employee of yours." "Technically, all dockers are in a peculiar status," Hargreaves replied. "We both know that since the National Dock Labor Scheme, our relationship with them is mediated." Calder did not rise to the bait. "There have been suggestions," he said, "that in recent months you and Mr. Doyle had crossed paths." "We inhabit overlapping worlds," Hargreaves said smoothly. "I represent those who pay for the ships to be loaded." He represented those who did the loading. Naturally, we disagreed on certain matters. "Including the current strike," Calder said. "Including the current illegal, damaging, politically motivated stoppage," Hargreaves corrected. Calder noted the phrasing. Politically motivated echoed ministerial language he had read in internal circulars. Code for tainted by communists. A way to strip legitimacy from economic grievances. "Did you ever meet with Mr. Doyle privately?" Calder asked. "Outside of public debates or formal negotiation rooms?" Hargreaves's eyes cooled a fraction. "No," he said. "Union leaders prefer to parade their disagreements in front of an audience. It lends them energy." Calder flipped a page in his notebook. "Where were you on the night of Tuesday the 8th between 11 and midnight?" he asked. "At home," Hargreaves replied readily. "With my wife. She can confirm that. We listened to the wireless until late." "There was a program about reconstruction in Europe." "Anyone else who might have seen you?" Calder pressed. "Our maid served us tea around 10:30, Hargreaves said. "After that, no. We retired." Calder made a note, an alibi built on domestic routine, hard to shake without something solid to contradict it. "There have also been reports," he continued, "of unfamiliar men seen around the docks in recent weeks. Well-dressed, but with, let us say, a soldierly air." "Some of them have been observed speaking with management staff." Hargreaves gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Inspector, the docks are a public space," he said. "Ships berth here from all over the world. Merchants, naval officers, government inspectors, we see all sorts. I cannot vouch for the habits of every man in a coat." These particular men, Calder said, seem especially interested in picket lines, in who stands where. In who speaks loudest. Hargreaves's gaze sharpened a fraction. If you are referring to additional security, he said, then yes. In the face of an increasingly volatile situation, some of our member companies have engaged private firms to protect property and ensure that those who wish to work can do so without intimidation. Private firms, Calder repeated. What sort of firms? Reputable agencies, Hargreaves said, often staffed by ex-servicemen. Men who did not suddenly forget how to follow orders when they took off their uniforms. And these ex-servicemen, Calder said, are they permitted to carry firearms while protecting property in Liverpool? Hargreaves's mouth thinned. They are instructed to operate within the law, he said. If you have evidence otherwise, I suggest you present it, rather than fishing for insinuations. Calder met his gaze levelly. A man has been shot dead on your docks, he said. A man who was a thorn in your side. Forgive me if I feel entitled to fish a little. A tense silence hung between them. Finally, Hargreaves smoothed an invisible crease on his trouser leg. Inspector, he said, I understand your position. I also understand that in cases like this, there is a temptation to look for grand conspiracies. It is more comforting, in a perverse way, than accepting that sometimes violence erupts from the very men Mr. Doyle claimed to represent. Dockers do. Not usually settle disputes with pistols, Calder said. Their preferred tools are a good boot, and perhaps a bottle if things go particularly sour. Times change, Hargreaves replied. There are darker elements among the labor movement now. I have seen reports from the security services. Calder's patience frayed. Careful, Mr. Hargreaves, he said coolly. You are veering close to suggesting that Mr. Doyle was killed by agents of a foreign ideology. That is a very convenient line for some, less convenient for those of us who must deal in evidence. Evidence which you do not have, Hargreaves said. Not yet. When you do, by all means call me back in. Until then, I have ships to move. This country does not feed itself on speeches and leaflets. He stood. If you have no further questions, Inspector, I will take my leave. For a moment, Calder considered detaining him on some trumped-up pretext, if only to watch the mask crack. But there was nothing to hold him on, not yet. You may go, Calder said. For now. When the door closed behind Hargreaves, Calder exhaled slowly. Rigby, who had been waiting in the corridor with deliberate non-curiosity, poked his head in. How'd it go, sir? He asked. Calder looked at the door. Like speaking to a man who has never been cold a day in his life, he said. He knows something, or knows someone who knows something, but he'll never put it in writing. And he'll never say it where it matters. Rigby shifted. What do we do then? He asked. Calder picked up his pen. We go back to the only people in this mess who don't have office curtains, he said. The ones who risked catching a bullet instead of a promotion. The dockers, the watchmen, the landlords who hear boots on their stairs after midnight. He opened the file again. And we see how many of them are willing to talk before someone else persuades them to stay quiet. Chapter 8. Pressure. The pressure began subtly. At first, it was just a sense among potential witnesses that someone was watching their doors. The watchman who had found Arthur's body came home one evening to find his front gate hanging slightly off its hinges, as if someone had leaned on it too hard. No one in the house had heard a knock. A tally clerk who had mentioned, in a careless moment over a pint, that he'd seen big lads by the north yard the night of the murder, discovered that his wife's ration book had gone missing from its usual spot. It turned up 2 days later, tucked neatly under their front mat. He could not remember if he'd dropped it there himself. You are jumpy, his wife told him. We all are. He did not tell her about the man in a dark coat he'd glimpsed across the street, standing too still under a lamppost with a newspaper unmoving in his hands. At the Union Hall, a brick came through a window one night during a late meeting. It landed on the floor near the back, miraculously hitting no one, wrapped in newspaper. Inside the paper, in block letters, someone had written, "Stop talking to cops. Stay in your lane." We should go public, Frank said, pacing the hall with the brick in his hand. Call a meeting. Show 'em this. Let everyone see what we're up against. And say what, exactly? Brennan asked. That nameless cowards are throwing stones? Half the city would call it boys' mischief. The other half would say we brought it on ourselves. Margaret sat with the brick on her lap, fingers tracing the grain. It is not meant to hurt, she said quietly. If they wanted to hurt, they'd have aimed at heads, not glass. It hurt enough, Frank said bitterly, gesturing at the shards on the floor. It is meant to frighten, she went on, ignoring him. It says, we can reach you. We can break things near you. Next time it might be your door, or your skull. Brennan adjusted his glasses. They want us to shrink, he said, to make the hall a smaller place, to keep our voices low. Margaret looked up. So we speak louder, she said. At the next general meeting, she did something Arthur had done only sparingly. She took the platform herself. The hall was packed, men standing shoulder to shoulder, caps in their hands, faces turned up. The air was thick with tobacco and sweat, and the faint, lingering smell of old hymnals and incense that the walls refused to forget. Brennan introduced her simply. Brothers, he said, you all know Margaret Doyle. I will not tell you who she is to us. You know, she has something to say. She stepped up. for a heartbeat. The sight of all those eyes on her threatened to knock the breath from her chest. Then she saw, at the back, a familiar profile. Frank, leaning against a pillar. Looking like a coiled spring, and felt steadier. "My Arthur," she began, and the hall quieted further, "is not here tonight. Not because he gave up, or grew tired, or changed his mind about what was right. He is not here because someone decided that a man standing up for his fellows was worth 3 bullets in the chest." A murmur ran through the crowd, a low growl. "They left him in an alley," she went on. "They painted his coat like a child tagging a wall." They thought they could make an example of him, that we would see and say, "Ah, best not stand too tall, best keep our heads down." She let the silence stretch, feeling it pull tight. "And already," she said, voice harder, "I hear things. I hear that he was too friendly with this faction or that he had enemies on his own side, that maybe, just maybe, this was not the work of men with clean hands, but of one of you." There were muttered protests at that, some angry. Some wounded. "I do not believe it," she said. "Arthur did not fear fists. He did not fear anger shouted in his face. He feared the ones who smiled while they reached for your throat." She held up the brick, the note still tied around it. "This came through our window," she said. "It says we should stop talking to the police, that we should stay in our lane." "What lane is that exactly?" "The lane where we work when we are told, for what we are given, and keep our mouths shut." "The lane where our dead are turned into cautionary tales instead of reasons to fight?" A man near the front, Billy Hart, frowned. "You want us all running to the coppers, then?" he called. "Last I checked, they were not on our side neither." "I want us not to be cowards," she said, meeting his gaze. "If you saw something, say it. To the inspector, to Brennan, to me. To someone who is not in the business of breaking your head for pay. Because if you do not..." The only story left will be the one written by the men who hired those bricks. A ripple of uneasy admiration moved through the hall. Some men nodded, others shifted, faces guarded. A few looked at the floor, as if something there were more interesting than the widow on the platform. After the meeting, in the cold air outside, Frank caught up with her. "You realize," he said, "you just painted a target on yourself." She adjusted her scarf. "It was already there," she said. They do not like women who knew a man too well to believe lies about him. Chapter 9. Westminster. In London, Arthur Doyle's name appeared in a different kind of room. And in Liverpool, Mr. Speaker, we have the most lamentable proof of what I have been saying all along about extremism on the docks. The member for a Tory constituency in Surrey waved a copy of a newspaper for emphasis, as if the headline itself were an exhibit. A so-called leader of the men who has been associated with unofficial stoppages and with elements we all know to be sympathetic to foreign ideologies, is gunned down in a sordid alleyway. And what do we hear from honorable members opposite? Platitudes about grief and dialogue. On the government benches, a labor backbencher from a northern town shot to his feet. "Is the honorable gentleman seriously suggesting," he demanded, "that the appropriate response to the murder of a worker, whatever his political leanings, is to wag our fingers at his comrades, while the employers who have been hiring private armies to frighten them get off scot-free?" The chamber rippled with shouted asides. The speaker rose, calling for order. George Isaacs, Minister of Labor, sat very still on the front bench. He was tired. The dock strikes of the late 40s had aged him faster than the war. He knew too well the tightrope the government walked. Support unions enough to maintain their backing, curb them enough to keep goods moving and American loans flowing. Whichever side he leaned towards, someone howled betrayal. A note was passed to him from a civil servant sitting just behind. He unfolded it under cover of folder and read, in tidy handwriting, "Liverpool CID. Reports no clear leads in Doyle murder. Strong Docker rumor of corporate enforcers, but no names given." Press handling volatile. Isaacs folded the note again. Expression unreadable. If he stood to speak now, he would have to say something that did not offend the dockers too much, did not alarm employers too much, did not give Tories an easy opening, did not make the cabinet look weak. He rose. "Mr. Speaker," he began, "the House will be aware of the tragic death of Mr. Arthur Doyle, a dock worker in Liverpool. Under circumstances that the local police are investigating with their customary diligence. I would urge honorable members on all sides to refrain from inflaming an already sensitive situation with unsubstantiated claims about the motives of those involved." He spoke for 5 minutes, walking a careful line, saying almost nothing that could not be interpreted 2 ways. In Liverpool, men listening to the wireless in pubs heard only distance in his voice. "They do not care," Billy said, nursing a pint at the Black Swan. "We're just pawns to them, all of us. Doyle, us, the lot." Frank sat nearby, clenching and unclenching his fists. "He's wrong," he muttered. "Who is?" Billy asked. "Isaacs," Frank said, "saying it's up to the police, saying we should trust the process. If the process worked, Arthur'd be here, not in the ground." Billy shrugged. "What you want then?" he asked. "Us to go storm some office? We'd be cut down like dogs." They'd love that. "See?" they'd say. "Brutal thugs, the lot of 'em." Frank stared into his glass. "I want," he said, "for someone to be scared on the other side for once." Billy snorted. "They are never scared, lad," he said. "They've got locks and guards and laws. Only ones ever scared are us." He downed his drink and signaled for another. Chapter 10. a name in the dark. It was nearly a week after the murder when Calder got his first real crack. He had spent the days since Arthur's death walking a tight grid through the lives that orbited the docks. He spoke to landlords and barmaids, to wives and watchmen, to tally clerks and casuals who lurked near the hiring halls, hoping for a day's work. Mostly, he heard what people thought he wanted to hear, or what they thought would not get them into trouble. Then, late one evening, as he sat in his office rubbing a knot from his temple, Rigby appeared in the doorway. "Sir," the constable said, "there's a man downstairs asking to speak with you. Says it's about Doyle. Would not give a name to the desk sergeant." Calder's senses sharpened. "Bring him up," he said. A few minutes later, a wiry man in his 30s shuffled into the room. His clothes were clean but cheap, his cap clutched in twisting fingers. His face bore the permanent squint of someone used to peering into dim ship holds. "Inspector," he said, voice low. "Name's Alfie Moss." I work the cranes sometimes. Other times whatever they'll pay me for." Calder nodded to the chair. "What brings you in, Mr. Moss?" he asked. Alfie sat, perching on the edge as if ready to bolt. "I heard," he said, "that you were asking about that night, about who was about the place." "I have been," Calder said. "Were you one of them?" Alfie swallowed. "I weren't nowhere near 4 and 5, he said quickly. "Not when it happened, but earlier, in the evening." "I was down by the north gate, watchin' the comings and goings, like you do when you've nowt better and you're hopin' someone shouts, 'We need a hand,' like." Calder let him ramble, recognizing nerves. "I saw Doyle," Alfie went on. "Walked past with his coat collar up. Man had a walk, you know, like he were always halfway through a speech in his head. And I saw... them." "Them?" Calder prompted. "2 fellas," Alfie said. "Not from round here, not from the docks. You can tell." After a while, their coats were too good for one, and they walked like they'd still rather be marching in time, if you know what I mean. "Army?" Calder asked. "Could be," Alfie said. "Lot of demobbed lads about, but these 2, they were not looking for work. One of 'em, big bloke with hands like hams, he had a thing in his jacket, under the arm. You can tell. Weighted it down." Calder's stomach tightened. "Gun?" he asked. Alfie shrugged, eyes darting. "I did my bit in the war," he said. "Seen enough of them to know the shape. I did not stare. I am not daft. But I saw enough." "Did you see them speak to Doyle?" Calder asked. "Not then," Alfie said. "But later, when I went for a smoke by the corner of Grafton's warehouse, I saw a big fella talking to someone else. A clerk from the offices. Mr. Pike, they call him. Always got ink on his cuffs." "Pike," Calder repeated. The name was familiar. He flipped through his notes. George Pike. "Shipping office," Been there 10 years. Keeps to himself. That's him, Alfie said. They were close like, not shoutin' or anything, but Big Lad gave him an envelope. Small. Pike put it inside his coat quick as you like. Did you see what was in it? Calder asked. Alfie gave him a look that said he was not a complete idiot. I weren't standin' that close, he said. By then I'd seen enough to know I did not want them seeing me. Did they see you, do you think? Calder asked. I hope not, Alfie said. But couple of nights after, I swear I saw a big fella near my street. Not close, just across the road. Smokin'. Then he walked off. Why come forward now? Calder asked quietly. Alfie's fingers kneaded his cap. Because of her, he said. Mrs. Doyle. Heard what she said in the hall. About cowards. I do not want to be one, Inspector. Not this once. But I've got kids. If word gets out, I've been in here. His voice trailed off. Calder considered him. Fear sat on the man like an extra coat. Nothing leaves this room with your name on it unless I absolutely need it to, Calder said. But I cannot promise nothing at all. If this goes to court... Alfie shook his head quickly. I do not need to be in no court, he said. If you're looking for where to poke, poke there. That Pike, and whoever hired Big Lad. Calder nodded slowly. You have done the right thing, he said. Alfie snorted softly. Feels more like I've just dug my own grave, he muttered. When he had gone, Calder took a fresh sheet of paper and wrote at the top, George Pike, possible link to armed enforcers. He sat for a moment, the pen hovering. Then, almost against his own better judgment, he added beneath, check financials, any recent unexplained deposits. He knew how such investigations tended to go. If Pike had been paid to pass information, times, routes, habits, he would not have put it in his bank under bribes. Still, money left traces, even when laundered through innocuous channels. The harder part would not be following the cash. It would be what came after, when those above realized he was treating this not as a dock brawl but as what it likely was, a murder with corporate fingerprints. He reached for the phone and dialed the number for the shipping offices. Port Consortium, North Branch, a clipped voice answered. Detective Inspector Calder, CID, he said. I would like to speak with Mr. George Pike, please. He pictured, as he waited, a small man in a too-big suit, hands stained with ink, heart thudding as he heard his name. And elsewhere in the city, perhaps in a cleaner room, a bigger man with heavier hands folding a newspaper, a slow smile spreading as he realized the game had moved to its next phase. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the station windows. The storm, Calder knew. Was only just beginning.